Today's conversation, I'm going to be going full live with you guys. What's up, Brad? As you guys file in today, please note this is open session, so you can ask your questions, fire away. I'll be looking at them here in the sidebar and make sure that we're all good to go and that we've got everything that we need. And so just to recap really briefly with what I started the presentation with today, this is our season planning presentation for you. Endurance Nation has been working with age group athletes for well over a decade now. And we have a pretty distinct process in terms of how we work with athletes. And quite frankly, it's the most important thing that we do. Workouts are workouts. What you do today doesn't necessarily affect what happens on race day, but what you do across many days, what you do across months, what you do across weeks, what you do across seasons and stacking seasons, that does make a difference. And so when we talk about building a successful version of yourself, building a really competitive, healthy, sustainable approach to training, it all starts with this season plan. And there's lots of different ways to plan a season, and I'm going to cover a few of them today. And for those of you who have questions about different sports or perhaps different types of events, you're welcome to chime in, give me feedback and so on. I'll be here for the better part of a half hour kind of talking. I got my cup of coffee, so I'm ready to go. With that said, we'll definitely dive in. So, season planning. Let's start first off by saying there's lots of different ways to plan. And in my case, as I think about being an endurance coach, there's kind of two versions, and I want to be as binary as possible and as simple for you guys as possible. So I want you to think about good versus bad versions of planning. So for me, bad versions of planning are when you sign up for an event just because it's on sale, or you sign up for an event just because someone told you should do it, or you sign up for an event just because it's there, right? You're like, I had no idea there was a race where you could, paddle a kayak and then swim, then rent a mountain bike and run. Then I'm going to camp out overnight in a shelter, and then just because it sounds cool and you signed up for it. Those impulse decisions are some of the hardest things that I deal with as an endurance coach, because we're trying to match different types of races with your overall progression. Another version of that challenge is what I see from a lot of our older athletes. We have over 40% of our athletes on the team are over 65 years of age. We have very competitive age group athletes across all disciplines, and many of those individuals are retired. And that becomes challenging. They will complain to me that our season planning form only has room for 5 races, and they're doing 5 races this month. Like they're doing 35 races across the course of a year, and that's awesome. Like, live it up, enjoy it, be athletic and love all of that. But at the same time, that multi-race season becomes a challenge because there's no distinct priority. For me as a coach, one of the largest red flags I see from an athlete is the week before their big race. Like, say they're doing the Boston Marathon, a week before the Boston Marathon or 2 weeks before, they send me an email asking me about a race in May. They say, I know I'm doing Boston, and okay, but what about this race in May? To me, they're mentally already checked out. They've taken the chips off the table for Boston. It's going to be what it's going to be. They're not that into it. Now they've got this backup event. And in many ways, I think that can be detrimental to not only your in-race performance, but just your overall development as an athlete. It's important. One of the reasons why we're athletic and we challenge ourselves with events is that there is a defined start and a defined end to that event. Whether you're competing for time, or you're competing with your the other people in your age group, or you're just competing with yourself, there's a competition there, and that's a fundamental element of this experience. And to take that off the table, to say, it doesn't really matter what happens today. It's like saying, hey, little Johnny, you've got to study for your algebra test today. And then you say, but you know what, there's another test on Friday, so study hard, but you can do it again on Friday. Little Johnny's going to go back to Fortnite. Like, who cares? Because he can do another test on Friday. He doesn't have to worry about it now. And so planning events can actually have a significant impact on your ability to focus as an athlete in terms of training, and your ability to put the appropriate weight on an event with regards to how you're going to execute. I think being a competitor means that you will experience highs and lows. That's part of why we do this. We expect to have challenges, and your season will map so accordingly. So those are the two types of challenges that I deal with and that I see athletes make in terms of mistakes. So again, to recap, those impulse decisions from a variety of different sources, whether it's financial or friends or whatever that may be, and then also the the multi-race season where it's very hard to identify what that priority is. So when you come inside the team, when you create a membership with the team, you submit a form to me. And your form comes to me directly, and it tells me what your races are. And it also asks you to pick just one race that is your big race of the season. And the reason why we do that is there has to be an anchor point. There has to be a place where everything that we're doing now, or everything we're going to do across the course of the year, funnels into a specific place. And the reason why we do that is that true north for your season, that is going to be the metric against which we measure all of our performance, all of our progress. It's how we align our training plans. It's where we work in our race rehearsals. All of that starts to make sense. And there can be other smaller events along the way to that bigger event, but at the end of the day, we're trying to have a place where we know this is where we're headed, this is where you've put the chips on the table, this is where we want to be successful. So if we did no other races for this year and you did one race, that's the race that you want on your resume. It's a very challenging conversation to have with some athletes because they want to be successful, endurance athletes or type A. They want to be successful at all of the events. I want to sign up for a cycling event and do well, but also train for a running event and do well. You know, if I'm working with triathletes and I say, here are the 3 disciplines, what do you want to focus on this year? They will tell me they want to be a better swimmer, biker, and runner. All the things, do all the things at the same time. And our body doesn't necessarily work that way. Our brain does, right? So my job as a coach is to work as that intermediary between what your body is capable of doing and what your mind wants you to do, and try and achieve, you know, successful goals, but being respectful of limitations of your body. So how do you pick a race for a season? What do you do, right? Coach Patrick's telling you, don't go nuts. Don't just buy a race because it's there. What do you want to do? I think it's really important to step back as an athlete. And the first thing I tell people to do is to look in the rearview mirror, right? Which apparently is located over here, where you always keep your rearview mirror. So look at your rearview mirror. Don't look in the future. Stick in the past, and just see what you've done. A huge part of what you're capable of doing is a function of what you have already done. So people tell me they want to run, rim to rim to rim. Is their birthday challenge or their epic challenge. Theoretically, they've got some kind of a running background, right? So there's a progression, there's a step forward in terms of a build. So look backwards and see what you did. Look at those events and see if there's anything there that you want to do moving forward, right? So step 1 is look in the rearview mirror and seeing what your past history has been. So for example, if you are a big runner and then you tell me you want to swim across the English Channel, that's a big undertaking and it's not going to happen right away. We've got to transition you from being a runner into a swimmer. So the closer that your key event is for the season to your history as an endurance athlete, the more likely it is that we can focus on it and start working at it right away. The more different it is, if you tell me you're a runner but you want to ride your bike across the country, that's a different challenge, right? If you tell me you're a cyclist and you want to do RAM and ride across the country in a group race, for example, like a relay race, we can do that, right? You've got the equipment, you've got the experience, you've been fit on your bike, you know what, you kind of have a sense of what the suffering will be like. We can kind of work through all those pieces of the puzzle together. So as you go through the process of making your season, start by looking in the past, okay? The second thing that you want to take a look at is your life, okay? So who are you as a professional, as a parent, as a social person, right? What are all the other commitments you have in your life? So, if you are an accountant, and March, April is just flat out crazy for you, don't sign up for a big race in April or in early May, because it's going to bring to a head the training that we need to do and all of the stress that you have for work. And your body is fundamentally unable to differentiate between the stress you have from work and the stress you have from training. Your body will just think that you are training all the time, whether you are at a laptop yelling at your clients or you are actually, swimming, biking, or running, or whatever it is you're doing to get ready for your big event. So take a good look at your year and identify places where you can have room to train. I see Mr. Marcus is here today. He does a great job. He's got flexibility with his summertime for training when the kids are at summer camp. And so he can focus on the fall as a race or a late summer race. So he's got plenty of time to do the training, be successful at work, not have to deal with all the logistics of kids because they're at camp, and then he can be successful, right? So take a look at your year and identify those places as well. If you are a school teacher, doing a race in September or October is a terrible idea because you're just getting back into school, right? You've got all that pressure you have to do. In the summertime, you've got more flexibility. So take a look at that, right? And really understand where you're at. It could be, maybe it's not you, it could be your family or your spouse. Maybe your spouse is really into something, or your spouse has some kind of big event planned, or it's their birthday, or it's your anniversary. Maybe your kid's a competitive lacrosse player and there's big tournaments that happen in June or whatever that may be. It's not my world, but that may be it, right? Whatever that is, understand the context within which you're bringing this event in your training. Because as we get closer to your race, the volume ramps up. And the more open that window is to having the training happen, the better off everyone is. Like if you can get the training in, you are happy. If your training is not interfering with work or family, the other people in your life are happy, or as happy as we can be, right? And life is better. So really take a look not only at your past, but also take a look at the world, the reality within which you live, and figure that out. In addition to looking at reality, I would also throw into the mix, take a look at your geography, right? If you live in a place where it's freezing cold all year long, or freezing cold through May, then you probably don't want to sign up for a hot race in March, because you're not going to have any outdoor training time. So do your best to synchronize your race goals with the environment within which you can train. So if you're able to get out and do a lot of riding in the summer, fantastic. If you live in the southern hemisphere, like many of our athletes do, then you are in your summertime now, right? So now's a great time for you to race. January, February, right? Throw up some of those early season Ironman races. They're perfect for you. They're terrible for me because I'm locked inside. But similarly, most of my events are terrible for you because you don't want to come here and deal with the weather. So do take a good hard look at that as well, and understand that if you do sign up for that early season race because it fits your schedule, it fits your budget, it fits your life, but it doesn't fit your weather, it doesn't have to make all of these things happy. If it doesn't fit your weather, then we have to set up some systems accordingly to make sure that you're successful. Whether it's an indoor training arena, we may have to work a little bit more on the mental side, mental toughness, strategies to keep you engaged through the winter training and to be successful, right? So all of those elements kind of come into play, right? So when we think about how we pick those races, I want you to start with yourself. Don't start with the race. We focus internally first, and we start with ourselves. Once you have a sense of what fits your progression and then what generally works in your life, that's really kind of narrowed down stuff. It takes a bunch of things off the table, unless you're fortunate enough to be planning far enough ahead. You can say, okay, in 3 years, in 2021, 2022, I want to do the Norseman Triathlon, and I'm going to start lining up all my ducks in a row now. The longer you have to plan for a race like that, whether it's off schedule or off discipline, the more flexibility that we have, okay? So you've gone through this process, you've identified your race, and we're ready to go. So now you know what your big race is. It's going to be, it's Labor Day weekend, which is a horrible weekend to have a race, but it's Labor Day weekend because I know when that is, and you've got this big race. So inside Endurance Nation, how do we build your season outside of that race? And it's really important to think about a couple different constraints that you have when we work on your race, okay? The number one constraint that we have is attention. Most athletes want to start training for their race the minute they sign up for it. They pay the money and they want to start training. So they signed up yesterday at like 8 p.m. and it's, you know, the next day, it's this morning, it's 4 a.m. and they are up. They got their bare feet on the floor and they're like, I just signed up for that race. I am training, even though it is 347 days away. That is quite possibly the worst thing you could ever do. So inside Endurance Nation, we don't focus on where you are now relative to your race. We focus on that race and we work backwards, right? So from your race, Endurance Nation works backwards 12 weeks, which we call our race prep phase, which is across all of our training plans, as that 3-month block within which we are training to race, okay? During the race prep phase, our training is very specific to what you're gonna do in the conditions. So if you're training for something like Leadville and the mountain bike race, this is when your long rides happen. This is when you may do some smaller events to connect together. This is when you will do some race simulation workouts. You'll try and find elevation. We'll do duration of work and duration of work at, or power, I should say. Power for time to mimic the courses that you'll be doing out there in the specific climbs like Columbine. We will put all of that together into this 12-week block, which is really you sort of sharpening, tightening things down, and getting ready for the race itself. Right? So those 12-week period, that's ultimately the most important time of your year. So rather than you saying, I want to start training today, we say, when is your A race? And then we work back 12 weeks from that race and we say, this block of time is really, really important to us. All the other training is important, but it's not as important as this 12 weeks. If you show up to this 12 weeks and you're not in the best of shape, we've got some issues, we've had some ups and downs, you've been sick, you've had travel, whatever, which is totally normal. Then we come into these 12 weeks and we say, all right, our job is to make sure we can be as successful in these 12 weeks as possible, right? So when we get into that place, for us, it's important for us to think about what are all the things that we can put into place to make sure we're successful. So that could be things like, you know, planning ahead and talking to your family about expectations. It could be something as simple as going ahead and even talking with your coworkers, etc., to say, look, these three months, you know, on Wednesday mornings, I'm going to be half an hour late. I promise I'll pick up the slack elsewhere. If you've been a good doobie, maybe you've been picking up slack before you get into those 12 weeks, whatever that may be, you sort of set the expectation that during this period of time, you're going to be a little more inwardly focused. Pro tip for those of you out there who are crazy selfish and are all like, me. Yeah, you can't be more selfish in the last 12 weeks. It doesn't work. There should be no dial on your selfishness, right? So at this point in time, if you've been burning all of that credit, we call them spousal approval units, if you've been burning all of the SAUs all year long before you get to this 12-week period, there's not going to be a lot of sympathy for you when you really need to get the training done. You've basically been crying wolf, saying that every weekend has been really important when really it hasn't been that important. So don't worry about it, right? So when we think about it, it's these 12 weeks where we want to be the most successful. So we put those at the end and we start creating all the pieces of the puzzle that we want ready. So when we get to this 12 weeks, we want to be able to train consistently. We want to have all the equipment dialed in. We want to have your basic nutrition dialed in. We want to know what your race targets are, and you've been working across the course of the year to build your fitness up to a level where you can start to do that work. So if your race at the end of on Labor Day weekend is a marathon, then we've been doing a fair amount of running and training, and your weekly mileage probably looks similar to what you'll be doing in the final 12 weeks, but it's been broken up into many different runs and different types of peaks and valleys, so that when we get to this last 12 weeks, we can differentiate your training enough to make it race specific, still have some adaptations, but we're really putting the final touches on your nutrition, on pacing, negative splitting, using your particular devices based off of the metric you're going to work off of, whether it's heart rate, power, it could be pace, whatever that may be. We start working on those pieces of the puzzle to dial things in. When people show up at 12 weeks and say, hey man, I've been on the sofa for 9 months, I'm ready to start training, that's a different undertaking altogether, which is why I'm talking to you about season planning here in February, and I'm not talking about season planning with you in July, right? Because that's not season planning, that's disaster planning. That's like last minute scrambling. That's, like evacuation time. Just throw everything in and just go. So the reason why we start this conversation in January, February, and with some athletes we started it even earlier. We started in late 2018 because we want to focus a bit on the full picture of your year. There are athletes that I work with who are planning 3, 4, 5 years in advance in terms of what they want to do, just to be able to schedule it accordingly. If that's the world in which you live and you need to do that, that's fine. The more planning time I get, the more planning time that we get, the better off that we are as athletes, okay? So 12 weeks race preparation time, that's when the training really matters. Those are our final long runs. Those are our final long rides. Those are key volume weekends we can put on the calendar. You can peek ahead and using Final Surge, our official training plan platform, and you can go ahead and scroll ahead and see what those weeks are and put them into your calendar and make sure that you have the time blocked out to do them. So before those 12 weeks, what happens? Well, we have a lot of flexibility in that prior time to those 12 weeks. And the way that we typically break it down in Endurance Nation is that we start working from that period of time back to where you are now, looking at the needs that you want to fill. So for most athletes, we have 2 specific needs that we're trying to fill. One is sport specific. Okay, so we look at your progression either as an athlete within the same discipline or as an athlete moving to a new discipline. What is the sport that is going to make you successful? Where do we want to develop the most strength, fluency, or competency to make your year work? Inside Endurance Nation, we have a 3-year training plan model for our athletes, and it helps them make decisions about the type of focus areas they should be on. Sometimes our bodies make the decision for us, right? You have a run injury, you can't run. Guess what? We're focusing on the bike this year because you can't run, right? You may have a specific event you've signed up for where it's just the bike, right? You're doing this ride across the country or a race across the West. It's a bike race. It's just biking. There's no other exercise that we're doing. So guess what? The focus is the bike, right? If you're a multi-sport athlete, it becomes a little more complicated in terms of defining what is the most impactful sport that you work on. But before we get to the race prep period, that's exactly what we're doing. We have run focus plans, we have bike focus plans, we have speed focus plans, where we encourage you as athletes in your season plan that we give you. We encourage you as athletes to invest that middle part of your year in that specific focus point before we get to the sharpening. So for example, if you're doing a marathon, then this middle block of your year is our run focus plan, which has you training not for a marathon, but more for training like for a 10K to a 10-mile race. So we want to develop speed, we want to develop ability to run at threshold effort, whether that's power, pace, or heart rate, and we want you to get comfortable with running well at distance It's part of that transition period between the work we do early in the year, which I'll get to in a second, and then your race prep period where the volume starts to go up and get a little bit longer. So that run focus period is 6 weeks, 42 days, an opportunity to really kind of focus. If you are a multi-sport athlete or you're an athlete moving to a new discipline, this is the time where you get to kind of role play in your new discipline. So if you're all of a sudden becoming a mountain biker, what's up, EB? If you're all of a sudden becoming a mountain biker and you're doing Leadville, like who knew? I need a mountain bike. This 6-week block becomes a time where you just get rid of all your gear. You just take all the gear and you put it in a big old box and you just put it away. And the only gear we have left is this mountain biking gear, because we're going to focus exclusively on riding. We're going to develop a core set of skills. We're going to develop fluency and competency at different ability levels in terms of intensity. We're going to learn some of the critical aspects of your sport that you may not have wrestled with before, whether it's because it's a new sport or because the event that you've picked has some discrete elements about it. For example, there may be a lot of downhill. There may be a lot of climbing. There may be transitions you need to focus on. This is the time of your year, the 6-week block, again, very defined element, where we get to really focus on that. So we can make you very successful at that area because we immerse you in the sport itself. And so if you are a triathlete and this is your year of cycling, then this 6 weeks really becomes, go out and find every road ride you can find. Like get on the group, stick on the back of the group as much as you can. Find new rides, find new routes, challenge yourself, find areas that are similar to the course you're doing. If you're going over to race in Europe and there's 10,000 feet of climbing, then let's try and find something that gets you as close to that as possible where you are. And we spend a lot of time doing that particular sport. It allows you to not only become more competent in the sport, but it also allows you to learn a little bit more about who you are, your own personal identity in that sport. What are the things you're good at? One of the challenges we have with athletes as they move across the season, as their fitness changes, is that their athletic identity may not change. They will say, I am not good at climbing hills at all, even though they are improving across the course of their year in terms of climbing hills. So I want to get you out of that typical mindset and put you in a place where during the 6-week period, it's like a new persona, new identity. We're going to get all dressed up in our new disguise and be this athlete for 6 weeks. This is generally a very welcome mental break from what is coming down the road, which is that race prep training, and what has come before, which is more of our higher intensity speed related training that happens in the winter. And so this middle part of your year becomes really important. And this part of our year we call the focus period. So we finish with the race prep, which goes to your race. We take a step back from that and we've got this focus period. So we've gone from 12 weeks now all the way back to as many as 18 weeks, right? So 18 weeks, we're talking 4.5 months, which is a healthy chunk of time and a great window, if you will, to drive into your race. So no matter the distance of the race you're doing, 4.5 months is plenty of time for us to get you ready for it, assuming that you have some competency in the sport or you have a good aerobic background, whatever that may be, right? Okay. So what's the step before that? What do we do before we get into our focus period? What happens very early in the season? Well, that's what's going on now, and actually has been going on inside Endurance Nation since late October. And that is our out-season training program, which is our winter protocol. And during the winter, we have a very different set of training protocols as a community, and they're very different than what you'll find anywhere else out there on the web in terms of endurance training. We are firm believers in using intensity and training stress as a tool to build your strength at threshold, whether that's on the bike, on the run, or whatever your discipline may be. These are critical skills that we need to have to prepare you for your season, for your race, but they're quite often at odds with the volume work that we need to do to make you successful. So if you're going to be a successful marathon runner, you have to be able to run for a long time, but you also have to be able to run fast. But getting better at running fast, strong at threshold, and getting better at running long are almost mutually exclusive on the dial. There's a similar amount of work that happens about up to an hour, but those of you trying to increase the volume on the running need to keep going. You need to go for an hour and a half, hour 45, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, depending on your speed. You cannot do a 2.5 hour run or a 3 hour run and also be working simultaneously on developing your speed and threshold across the week. Your body simply cannot handle that training load. So inside Endurance Nation, we have divorced that completely, and we've put that speed and intensity earlier in the year in our out-season training programs. But during the out-season, which is 14 weeks, okay, so we're talking 3.5 months here. So you've already got your 4.5 months of your focus and your race prep. Now we're going all the way back 3.5 months. You put those two together, we got 8 months, 2/3 of a year. Man, my math game is strong today. 2/3 of a year to drive you to your race. And this out-season period is where we really sort of focus things down to the minimum. We try and keep your training load very low, it's meant to be an exact opposite on the perspective of what you just did at the end of last year for your training. So if last year you finished with a fall marathon, you're doing lots of long runs, you had good weekly mileage, you were running very frequently. Now we want to put you in the out season. We're going to try and incorporate some cross training. We're going to do very short workouts. There's going to be more than 24 hours if possible between training sessions, whereas in the race prep period from last year, you likely had sessions that were bumping up to one another, some of them perhaps even on a 12-hour cycle. Very stressful on the body, not giving you a lot of time to adapt, right, to the stress you're putting into your body. We want to have that time now in the out season because we get to hit you with even harder work and we need more time to recover. So the more work you do in a session, the more time you need to recover. We even factor in days off. So when people pick up my race prep training plan, they say, Coach Patrick, you've got me training for this Ironman. There are no days off in my 12 weeks to my Ironman. What am I going to do? Inside our world, you've had most of your days off already in the winter and plenty of rest. And of course, if you need to adjust your plan, you can work with me and we can make that happen. But in general, the work and the rest, the real work and the real rest happens early in the year when we need to get it done, when we need to build things up, okay? When we change the game, we start adding more volume, we start adding more distance, try to get more specific to your event. Some of that intensity goes away, but also because it goes away, the training stress is mitigated. Yes, 100 training stress points is still 100 training stress points, but fundamentally, 100 training stress points earned from a very hard 1-hour effort is different than 100 training stress points earned in a 3-hour leisurely ride on beach cruisers with your friends. And that type of longer endurance-related stress is much easier for people to absorb and continue to train upon than what folks have in the wintertime, which is that higher intensity work. And again, inside Endurance Nation, we have completely divorced that from the other section of your year, so we do a lot of it now in the winter. So while everyone else is doing these long workouts and base miles and easy training, 4 hours on the indoor trainer or 3-hour run on the treadmill, our athletes are doing shorter intervals. They're doing frequent intensity. They're doing things like strength training. They've added in plyometrics. We're trying to do things now in the out season that really significantly advance our year when we have the bandwidth to handle it. Our goal with the out season explicitly is to have you exit those 14 weeks at the fitness level that you finished last year at. So last year you trained for 8 months, you had a good year, you stayed healthy, you built up to your race, you had a good performance, you had great fitness, etc. Then you've taken time off, you've rested, you've detrained, and now you come into the out season. Our goal at the end of the out season, in those 3.5 months, is to have you back at last year's fitness at the end of the out season, giving us another 4.5 months, essentially, to get your fitness even higher. And that delta is really important because ultimately, your goals on a macro level involve staying consistent, staying healthy, and continuing to improve. I need to factor in times across your year where we have opportunities to do that, and we manage that by dividing our intensity from our volume and by breaking out the sports that you're competing in by having more general training focused on your fitness versus specific training focused on your discipline of choice, okay? So that's what the whole year looks like in terms of spacing things out. As we move over to thinking around whatever your sport of choice may be, it really works backwards from your race. It starts internal with you, both from your history and your limitations, the parameters that you deal with in terms of your reality. It goes before that into this focus period where we really get to become the identity of what you're trying to achieve. It's a 6-week block, so you're able to sustain it mentally, but you're also going to see some benefits from it physiologically as well. And then even prior to that, we start doing some of that general conditioning work that sets the stage. I like to remind everybody out there who's listening that I don't measure your time inside Endurance Nation from the day you signed up to where you are now. I don't say you've been on the team 3 years. I count your time inside Endurance Nation by the number of out-season training programs you have completed. So have you done 4 out seasons? Have you done 5? Have you done 1? The out season is really that introduction for how we train. It gives you a sense of how we prioritize the main set of our work and the value of intensity with relation to developing your overall endurance fitness. And it really kind of sets the tone for the rest of your year. I think the out season is a great opportunity to get focused without having that pressure of trying to carve out instantly massive weekend workouts, things that eventually can start to wear you down. At the end of the day, we are trying to build up your fitness incrementally across the year to have you be successful in your race. And that requires patience, it requires discipline, it requires a diversity of training modules, if you will, across your year. And the reason why this is really important from a season planning perspective, a lot of times when people come to us, they'll say, I had a one-on-one coach, I would post my information online, and then she would give me these workouts for the next week. When you get into that very micro level of training, it's very hard to have a sense of that overall progression. You essentially are functioning in a one-on-one environment, which is, I put something in, I get something back. I make a decision, I put something in, I get something back, right? While that feels good, while you feel like you're getting that connection, you're getting some instant feedback, it's actually very hard to keep yourself oriented on that long-term goal and make decisions that are relevant for your overall progression when you get into that micro level of decision making. So for me, as a coach of all the members of Endurance Nation, one of the leaders inside the community, I use the training plans and the structure of a season as the canvas upon which we put these workouts. And I think that broader sense of the canvas and this progression of moving from out season to focus to race prep is really critical for athletes to understand. So they have intermediate finish lines, they have short-term goals that are achievable, they can measure their progress against, and that they know they can trust the process and know that as they move from the out season into the focus, into the race prep, that they are walking that path. Otherwise, you are either just trying to do the best possible workout today, which may not be the most important thing for you overall, or you end up just focusing on the race itself and say, Coach, I'm running this marathon, but so far I haven't run more than 6 miles. I'm doomed. Like, I need to run 20 miles now, even though the progression of your year doesn't allow for that to happen this early, right? Or for you athletically, you may need more time, or maybe we're cross-training. All those permutations, all of those pieces come in now, okay? So I'm going to take a brief break here. I'd love to see some questions from you guys. I got lots of stuff coming in the sidebar. I see everyone here. I see Ewan tuning in from Ireland. What's up, my friend? Excel Sports over there. Who else we have? We got Alicia, we got Paul. Donica's also joined. Donica and Ewan, you two have to meet each other sometime. Both from Ireland. Would love to hear your questions, or particularly about whether it's a race or inserting other races and so on. I'm going to have a sip of my coffee, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we factor other races in, because it's an important step towards not only becoming competent in your big race for the year, especially for newer athletes, but also can be a tool through which you can develop critical fitness, okay? So don't be afraid to type those questions. So, as I think about intermediate races, I talked earlier about those race rehearsal workouts and how we use those as a tool to make you prepared for the event itself. But for newer athletes in a discipline, sometimes having what we call B or C level races is important just to kind of get in the mix. So if you're going to be doing your first trail run, for example, or trail marathon or half marathon, or whatever you signed up for, it'd be great for you to go out and do a trail race just to get the vibe. What does registration look like? What are the people like? What did I forget? What did I learn? Right? All of that comes together in a real world environment and gives you an opportunity to hopefully make that quantum leap forward as an athlete before we get to the race, before we show up on the big race day and realize I have the wrong shoes, or I've packed the wrong gear, or I thought there were more aid stations, or I thought aid stations on trail runs were just like aid stations in my marathon, and oh, they're not. We want to learn those lessons earlier. So for athletes who are moving into a sport or to a new discipline or to a new challenge, those early season races can be important milestones. They're not necessarily something that we will peak fitness for to perform at. You can go out and race them and we will recover from them, but they in general replace the training sessions that you have allotted for either that weekend or that day, and they're just part of that developmental cycle along the way, okay? Now some other athletes like to use races as the lever through which they build their fitness. This is an important tool for the athletes that we coach who we use our minimalist training programs. What's a minimalist training program, you say? It is literally the minimum effective dose of training we can do to get you ready for your race. These are great for athletes who travel, who've got crazy life schedules, who have minimal time. You know, you're the kind of person who gets up at 4 happy to do your workout because it's the only time that you get, like 4 to 5:30. And then your world blows up. You've got work, you've got social commitments, you've got after work commitments. Life just is what it is, and you're not going to take over that other time. So the minimalist program becomes effective to you. For those of you in that space, using intermediary races is actually helpful, because if you put a race on a calendar, you can get away for the weekend. You can do a big event. You can do something you wouldn't normally be able to do. So forcing in a 3-hour ride on a weekend may be challenging for you. You can only get in 90 minutes, let's say. Well, but if we put, say, something like a half Ironman on the schedule that has a 3-hour bike ride as part of the race, you can go do that and do that whole event, get all of the learning from the event itself, but also build that fitness. And so there are athletes out there who will literally plan events every 6 to 8 to 10 weeks apart, just as those inputs, those extra doses of volume or focus that they can't normally get when they're doing their basic training, because life just conspires against them, because that's the way it is. So sometimes those events can become a useful tool, right? Another example of season planning for athletes is what I like to think about is differentiating between like a single race season or a multi-race season. Well, what does that mean? So a single race season means you pick a race after which you are basically winding down detraining and then moving on to either something else, a different challenge, a different sport, or maybe taking time away because you need a break. The dual season is where athletes will pick an early season event, say, for example, if we're using a regular calendar year, say something like April, and they'll pick a secondary event somewhere along the way, like say September. An athlete like that will have enough time to build up for their race in April, detrain, sort of recover a little bit, and then pick things back up again and go to that second event. So in that case, those athletes can have 2 peaks in one season. If we're looking at a graph, we'll have 2 mountains in that season. Those athletes have an opportunity to kind of effectively put 2 volume builds or two versions of a year into a single year. Right? It's challenging to have 2 peaks. It's a lot of work, but what it does allow you to do is to significantly step up your progression and development as an athlete. That's typically something we recommend to athletes who are in their 3rd year or more of endurance training, relative to whatever their long-term goals may be. Some athletes have had success by combining races, by saying, I can only really have one big peak for my season, so I'm going to put my races within this peak, and then I'm going to manage my effort across these races to be successful at multiple races in, say, a 4 to 6 week window. It's about as long, 6 weeks is about as long as you can go in terms of sustaining peak endurance fitness before things start to tail off, and you're going to either need to rest and then rebuild again, or shut things down for the rest of your year. So as you think about your year and your overall goals, if you're one of those athletes who is really trying to make that next step up and make that big progression, then maybe the 2 race season is really important for you, where we say we're going to have that early season race, recover, and then late season race. Okay? If you're an athlete who's super time crunched, then that minimalist approach, where we say we're going to use incremental races across the year as those milestones to keep you on track, to make sure that you're training, and to also ensure that you're getting in some of that critical race-specific volume without the challenges you normally would associate with your daily training environment, right? And then, of course, we have athletes who are looking for that, what I call sort of bunching, where they'll put their races in close proximity and say, hey, you know what, in August, I've got this flexibility. I'm going to do 2 or 3 races in August so I can get all my racing done. I'm good. If something else happens later in the year, that's a bonus, but this is really where I'm at, okay? Okay, great. So those are the 3 different types of sort of season planning in terms of progression as an athlete, by using races either as a tool, using races either as a function of a peak, or using races as an opportunity to leapfrog your fitness across several years. So as you can tell, there's a lot of different permutations here, which is why I believe season planning is the most important part of your year, and it's the first thing we do with you guys when you sign up for the team, and what our athletes do together with us every single year, okay? So another element that I want to talk about with season planning, which is a little bit different than what I've covered so far. I've got about 5 more minutes left, so you guys do have questions, fire them up for me, okay? Another element that I like to talk about for a season, which I think is really important, kind of goes against a lot of the stuff I've said here so far, which is the fun stuff, okay? And I want to again go back to being sort of binary here and say there's 2 types of fun stuff. There's fun stuff that you just do because you're fit, because you're an athlete, you love being active, you love being outdoors, you don't mind a little bit of hard work. There's some fun stuff you can do, like in the fall, generally that really works. So you may sign up for something like a running relay, something like a Ragnar event. You may sign up for some kind of crazy hike challenge. Whatever it is, you can do it because you're fit. You know, you've been active, you've been training. Why not? Why not go do it? Because you can. And having fun events on the calendar is a great opportunity for you to get outside of your comfort zone. It's an opportunity for you to check in with other people and just feel sort of reconnected with the sport, the endurance world as a whole, versus that very focused area of people who are in my age group, who also live in this part of the country, who also do the same sports I do, who I'm also, by the way, stalking on Strava. That's maybe not the most effective social experience for you as a human being. So getting outside of your comfort zone and just doing some fun stuff with other people, things like relays are great because everyone gets to participate. You can be as serious as you want or as unserious as you want, and it's fun. So having those fun events are important. Another element of fun that we can do is to work that into the earlier part of your season as training opportunities across your year. So one of the things that we like to do inside the team is we have training camps for athletes. And we have two different types. We've got like official training camps that I run. And then we also have member-led camps where our athletes will throw a flag in the ground and say, everybody meet me here in Moab. Everybody meet me here in Bend. Everybody meet me here in Vermont. And we are going to train together and have a great weekend and put a lot of volume in, put a lot of training in, have a great social experience, and reap the rewards of both. I find those experiences are the best. They typically cost less than a race, but they are more time consuming because it's a couple days. It's 2 or 3 days away. But this is something you can do with your friends. This is something you can do locally as well. I've done weekends where I've literally, ridden 120 miles, like taken a box, filled it with clothing, mailed it to a bed and breakfast, right? Then ridden my bike up, met the box at the bed and breakfast, had a change of clothes, opportunity to go out to dinner, hang out, do whatever I want, pack my dirty clothes back inside that box and turn it into the front desk the next morning and say, please, here's $20, please mail this back to this address. And then I ride my bike back, right? So I get a very long ride. I get to explore new areas. I get to do some cool stuff with friends. And it's building my fitness. It's not a race, so I'm not financially super invested in it if things go wrong. I can be flexible. It's also not related to a specific performance. Sometimes with races, you can really be holding yourself accountable for a time or a performance, when really at the end of the day, this event wasn't intended to be that way in terms of your overall progression. So having a fun event like a training weekend or a training camp can be a good opportunity to help you build your endurance, transition from that out-season training to your in-season training, but do it in a social way where some of the pressure is off, but it's still very useful to you as an endurance athlete. And that goes for all disciplines. I gave an example of cycling, but you can do it for running, you can do it for swimming, whatever it may be. There's lots of opportunities out there to challenge yourself within your discipline of choice, and to also just keep it fun. I mean, one of the biggest advantages that we have now as endurance athletes that we didn't have back in the day is all of these online social networks, just like Team Endurance Nation, where people can connect, find folks who are similarly minded, who are similarly focused, and you can get together and do some great training with them and enjoy that social aspect of it as well. So I do want you to keep that in mind too. So it's not just all about work, it's not just all about racing. Part of a successful season is not only that diversity of training phases and using different plans across the way, it's also incorporating room for you to mentally relax, understand that you're moving forward, but we're not doing it in such a regimented way like did I or did I not succeed today. It becomes much more about the social side of things, and it becomes an opportunity for you to maybe challenge yourself by doing something a little different outside of your regular comfort zone, which I think is important mentally as well. Now remember, when you do enter that race prep period, then things start to get serious. Things really start to get focused on what that race is, and we ultimately do get really into the nuts and bolts and say, we want this ride to look like this, or this run to look like this, or this is the power number we want you to sit on. But we're not doing that all year. We have targets for you, we have goals for you, but I try and be as sneaky as possible in terms of building that work up so that by the time you get to that race prep period, you've done all the training you need to do to be ready to train for the race. And there's definitely a line of demarcation there across which we move to get into that race period. Until you get there, all the work that you do before you hit that line is all about development. It's all about preparing and setting the stage for you to be successful. But there's a lot of bandwidth on this side. If things go wrong, if you have hiccups, if you have a setback, you get sick, you have work changes, something happens where your bike is stolen, I have no idea. There will be problems, there will be hiccups, we call it life. You may be familiar with this thing. When that happens, it's not an issue. Because you've been doing work and you've been consistent, having to take some time off isn't the end of the world, because you're not starting from zero, although it may feel like it. You are actually starting from a midpoint of this general progression you've already been taking. So my job as a coach, as an advisor to you here on this group chat here in this Facebook Live video, is to help you stay as engaged as possible across the longest period of time, whether it's a year or it's multiple years as we stack them, so that you have that fitness, you have that fluency and competency, so that the importance of that race prep window then changes only in relation to what you put into that race. Is this a race that you're trying to complete? Is it a race where you're competing, or is it a race you're trying to win? Those markers then become more of a decision maker in terms of how focused or intense we are when we get to the final period of your year. Okay, so that's pretty much it for season planning. Again, just to let you guys know, this is the out-season period time of year. We're doing that early season focused, intense oriented work that builds the foundation upon which we get focused with our discipline-specific training block, and then we move into our race prep. If you have questions about Endurance Nation, you can obviously put them here on our Facebook page. We'll be happy to answer you. You can head over to Endurance Nation now and sign up for our plan level, which is just $47 a month. That will give you all of our training plans. I do the season plan with you. I'll get on the phone with you and talk with you and kind of walk you through everything. The team and coach level plans, which involve the community and more coaching, those are off the table right now. They are closed for the month of February, but you can certainly go ahead and sign up for plan, and we can upgrade you when the time comes due. If you do want to get more interactivity with the team and learn from them and all the forum resources that we have, if you do want more time with me individually, whether that's one-on-one or then group learning environments like this that we do inside the team, that's all possible as well. Most important thing though is that getting those first workouts lined up and making sure they're all general trending towards the season goal that you have. We'll do that together and we'll get fired right away. Okay, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. I'll be back next month with another Facebook Live event. You'll see all the information that we'll post here about it. I look forward to talking with you guys then, but until then, I'll see you guys online or at the races. See you guys.